I'm a little tiny person, so we might have to make this shorter. Let's see. Awesome. Well, listen, y'all call me Meg, and one thing that Karen didn't mention, I'm an undergrad from UVA. I mean, this cannot go without being mentioned. So, got my degree in psychology. I'm sure Gilmer hasn't changed a bit in the last 30 years. And I actually lived on U Circle, which is where I live now. So I went all around the world and then ended up right back where I started at UVA, which is where else, I mean, where better could you be? So anyhow, I'm so pleased to be here and just ready to answer your questions and fire away.
All right, can you guys hear me? All right. One of the people who you talk to in your books, Talia, talks about how she heard that the 20s are supposed to be the best years of our lives. That's something that I've heard, and I'm sure that's something that a lot of people here have heard. And sometimes people even narrow down to the 4 years at college are the best years of your life. Where does this myth come from, and why does it still exist today?
Yeah. Gosh, where does it come from? I mean, I don't know where it comes from, but the general gist is college, 20s, it's the best years of your life, and then adulthood starts, and it's sort of all downhill from there. Like, that's the general thinking, or maybe used to be. I think it's changing a bit. I'd like to think in part because of the defining decade. But I don't know if it's helpful or not helpful to know that statistically speaking, your 20s are not the best years of your life. Sorry, but it might make you feel less alone. So actually, people tend to really struggle in their 20s, that happiness kind of takes a little bit of a dip from childhood down into our 20s and then sort of grows across adulthood. And one of the reasons for that is that the modern 20s, the 20s y'all are living through, are probably the most uncertain decade you'll ever live in. It's probably the only time of your life where you'll wake up in the morning and you'll think, I don't know where I'm going to live in 5 years. I don't know what I'm going to do in 5 years. Maybe I can never pay my bills. Maybe I'll never be happy. Maybe I'll be alone forever. And so that's kind of stressful. So most people don't actually find, I mean, you have a lot of fun in your 20s. I had a lot of fun in my 20s. But statistically speaking, and for me, and honestly most of the people in my life, they're really not the best years of your life. And I mean that in a good way. I tell my clients, if your 20s turn out to be the best years of your life, something has gone terribly wrong. Because what you want to do in your 20s is set yourself up for happiness also in your 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond. There was actually cartoon in the New Yorker recently, and there was this woman, she was like lying in bed under the covers, and there was a Peter Pan figure coming in, sort of looked like maybe he was going to grant her wish of forever youth or something. And she said, you couldn't pay me enough to be in my 20s again. So anyway, I'm not trying to like bring y'all down as much as to say that the 20s are a great time to have fun and see the world, make friends, and do a lot of cool stuff. But it's a tough time, and so that was really why I wrote The Defining Decade, so that people would feel less alone with that, and so that they would also have a sense of, okay, what do I do to get through it and build something that feels good.
So Karen mentioned that I'm a psych student, and there's this idea that comes up a lot, both in psych classes and pop culture. For me, I hear it all the time. It's the idea of caring for your inner child. And I was wondering if that's something that comes forward in your work, thinking about like suddenly being an adult and just talking about how like it can be a very hard time. And it's this idea that comes forward all the time. Like it's an idea of self-care that I'm wondering if comes up in your work at all.
You know, that's funny. It doesn't, but I'm curious. So tell me how it comes up in the classes or you know.
So ready to sit right back down there.
You're not done.
Well, just the idea that, like, I don't know, we are becoming adults and we are adults, but that there's still a part of us that needs to be cared for in the way that children are cared for.
Right,
and that,
right.
like, you don't have to be 100% on top of everything all
Right.
the time.
Yeah.
And that you're allowed to have moments of, like, I don't know what I'm doing, this is overwhelming, everything's hard.
Yes, absolutely. I had a client was texting me yesterday, and her dog, her very beloved dog, is maybe having some health problems. And she said, I'm using all my skills that you've taught me, but I'm still upset. And I was like, of course. The point of all this is not for you never to be sad or scared or anxious or stressed. I mean, it's normal to have, all the emotions that people have in their 20s around, oh my gosh, my dog may not be well, or oh my gosh, I don't know if I'll get into grad school, or oh my gosh, my partner broke up with me. That those bring up normal developmental feelings of stress and anxiety and depression. And so I think it's one of the things that people do in their 20s is to figure out, how do I allow myself to have those feelings, and how do I put one foot in front of the other when I need to, not necessarily be perfect all the time with it, but just really accept that that's going to be part of life.
Okay, so I have a question about how you've been able to merge your faith with your work in psychology, and if you've seen, I don't know, like in the Bible or in spirituality in general, how that works with psychology.
I just broke the microphone, but I think we're okay. Well, I will be completely transparent and say I'm agnostic, and so I don't know how many people just read or have read a book I just read called Good Without God. Anybody ever read that? That's a really cool book. And so for me, so being agnostic is kind of saying, I don't really know who's in charge of the universe, and I'm not really sure what the deal is with that, but I have to figure out a way to be a good person and to have faith in something and to wake up in the morning and feel like there's something bigger than myself. And I feel like that has helped me in my work with clients, because my clients come to me with a lot of different backgrounds and beliefs and sort of orientations toward the world. And in a lot of ways, I'm pretty agnostic about it. Like, I think if you read The Defining Decade, you'll sort of perceive that I'm pretty agnostic in terms of what you decide you want to do with your life, or whether you do or don't lean on faith. And so it's really helps me just kind of let the client bring what is useful to them, into the work. And so we work with what's useful to them. And so I guess I would say that's sort of, for me, been useful.
So one thing else that you talk about in your book is the relationship between, anxiety and depression and social media. And I think that's something that a lot of us here probably experience a lot. How would you say the relationship between those two is really defined? Do you think that people already have those issues and go to social media, or is social media, bringing about those issues? So which comes first?
Yeah. There's some cool research about, in human development and adult development, about how it's a normal human drive to want to know, like, where do we stand in the world of, do people like me? Am I on the top? Am I on the bottom? Like, if there is such a thing. But that's sort of a normal thing for people to want to sort out. So I think that we come into this world to survive. We kind of have to feel like we're in a group, not excluded, because it's tough to survive if you're just out there on your own. So I think it's normal to want to know, am I in? Am I out? Am I okay? Am I not okay? What do people think of me? I think social media has made that really tricky, because it gives you really too much data on that. And it's not really good data, right? So there's just sort of constant data that we perceive of other people are doing amazing, and this person didn't reply to my comment, and it's really just kind of too much to really digest, I think. And so I think it is a normal drive or wish to want to engage with other people and get a sense of where we stand, but I think social media makes it pretty tough, because, I'm not going to repeat what y'all all already know about how when we go on social media, we compare our insides to everyone else's outsides, and our, kind of wonky everyday lives to their, like, skydiving in Dubai. That doesn't feel good. And no matter how many times someone tells you that, or I know that, you go on social media and you see those pictures or you see those posts, and you still have to do that work of, oh yeah, okay, that's their outsides comparing to my insides. I have to, unpack that a little bit and not have that make me feel anxious or depressed about where I am. So I think that's kind of how people manage it, but that's a lot to manage every single day. So, with a lot of my clients, and again, I'm agnostic about social media, but I asked them to look at how do they use it, and how is it working for them, and how is it working against them? How is it making them feel, sort of happier or better about their day-to-day, and how is it not? I think it's just like any other substance, whether it's food or alcohol or whatever the case may be. Like, as adults, you're going to have to figure out how to manage it in a way that's healthy for you.
I was reading about some of your research on resilience as well, which I think is really interesting to think about right now. I believe that book was published pre-pandemic, and I was wondering about, in this long period resilience that everybody has had to go through, how do you see that work and that research that you did originally? How much of that has held up for you, and what's been new or surprised you about an elongated period of needed resilience like this?
Yeah. He's referring to the other book I wrote, which Karen talked about. It's called Supernormal: The Secret World of the Heroic Child, and it's about adults but who grew up with adversity as kids. So chronic stressors like alcoholism in the home, or having a parent in jail, or a mentally ill sibling, or whatever the case may be. And the book is really about how do you grow up with that, and then as an adult decide, I want to have a better life than the one I saw when I was younger, or I want to somehow do it better than it was done for me. So anyway, it's a very deep dive into resilience if anybody's interested. But obviously, I thought a lot about that with college students, and going through what everyone was going through over the pandemic. And what I thought was interesting is there were a lot of articles. I don't know if y'all read the paper, but there was a lot of articles about why are college students struggling so much? Why are 20-somethings struggling so much? That there was a lot of data saying that your age group was sort of the most stressed, the most anxious, the most depressed of all the ages. And people, of course, jump to conclusions about that of you're the most fragile or the least prepared or the whatever. But as someone who works with 20-somethings, my take on it was that all the uncertainties that people out of their 20s were struggling with the pandemic, y'all were struggling with all that and more. Because during the pandemic, I woke up next door to Karen, who's my neighbor, and I have a house, and I have a partner, and I fortunately still have a job, and everybody stayed healthy. And that's a luxury, that's a privilege. And a lot of 20-somethings, of course, were waking up going, what if I do all this college and I don't get a job? Or what if, because of this, I'm going to have to stop school? Or what if, and they're waking up without that support system and without that maybe stable place to live. So I think I was thinking a lot during the pandemic just about how it really shone a light on how legitimately difficult our college and our 20-something years are. And the pandemic just kind of exacerbated that for y'all, and I think kind of showed it to some older adults. I mean, in terms of the resilience piece, I guess the other thing I was thinking about a lot is there were also a lot of articles about how, oh no, if you're in college or in your 20s right now and it's intersecting with the pandemic, you're done. This is not going to work out well. And I would caution you against drawing that conclusion or jumping to that conclusion that this has of course gone on longer than anyone wanted or anticipated, but it is going to pass, and you are still going to have time to get out there and create the lives you want. I mean, you're doing it now, and you just don't have a way of knowing what might have happened. I'm not trying to put a silver lining on the pandemic as much as to say you don't have a way of knowing what might have happened during the pandemic that actually turns out to be helpful to you, that might not have happened otherwise. I had a lot of people, it was interesting, people would email me. Some people would email and say, I read your book, but I'm 20 during the pandemic. I can't do any of the things you said. And other people would read the book and say, I read your book, and I never would have read it if I wasn't stuck at home with this stupid pandemic, but now I feel like I'm, better positioned for what comes next. So I guess, there was a lot of research with the 2008 Great Recession and looked at young adults and how it was kind of harder to kind of get going, and people kind of catastrophized that to a certain extent and said, well, they'll just never catch up. But now when you look at the research from those 20-year-olds who are now, approaching 40, they caught up. The gains have been made. So I think part of resilience is not kind of catastrophizing or letting sort of the clickbait headlines convince you that your life can't work out because you're starting off, in the pandemic.
Okay, so we have our first question from the audience. And so it says, so I heard that your brain stops developing at 25. Is that true? And how does that play into your life as a 20-something?
Stops developing? No, thank goodness, because I'm way past that. Stops developing? No, but it's definitely going through its second biggest growth spurt. So there's a lot of brain plasticity going on in your 20s, which means that you're just soaking up the world and learning so much. And this is really the time to learn new skills, new habits, new hobbies, new languages, like whatever it is you want to learn. It will be easier for you to do that in your 20s than in your 30s, 40s, and beyond. It reminds me of something I was forgetting to say about the resilience piece, is that having a pandemic happen in your 20s, whether it was fun for us or not, but was probably a great opportunity to learn, how do I get through really tough stuff that just won't stop? Like, what are the skills that I can use? Do I lean on other people? Do I go for walks? Do I meditate? Do I turn toward faith? What are the things I'm going to use when life gets difficult? Because life's going to get difficult again, probably, in some way or another. So the pandemic is a great opportunity to learn those skills, and your 20s are a great opportunity to learn those skills because your brain is wiring up for adulthood. Like, that's why it goes through its second growth spurt, adolescence to adulthood. It's going like, okay, new learning, bring it on. I've got to be an adult now. So what you do during your 20s, the skills that you learn, the habits that you develop, those really are sort of the foundation for who you're going to be in your 30s and beyond. Your brain is still developing, but just not quite the same, I have to say. So I'm not going to go on a huge tangent about this, but I was going to mention about resilience and the pandemic. I was on semester at sea with, college students when the pandemic broke out on a ship in Asia with a woman sitting in the back right there, Emma. Hey, Emma. And so Emma and I and the whole 500 20-somethings on the ship, we learned a lot about sort of, what skills you put to work when you don't know if your boat's ever going to be able to dock anywhere, and you don't know how long you're going to be at sea, and it was supposed to be 2 days, but now it's been 3 weeks. So anyway, even at 50, I was learning a lot about that. But
So many people who are in older generations than us, millennials and Gen Z, have a tendency to judge a lot of what we do, and oftentimes it's in a very negative way and are very critical of what we do. What would you say that that's flawed, that's inherently flawed what they're doing, and why would you say it is flawed?
yeah, yes. I mean, I work with 20-somethings all the time, so I have a particular vantage point and, a lot of compassion and honestly just understanding of the research and what life is really like for 20-somethings. So like I said, I see a pandemic that shines a light on how much 20-somethings are struggling. And I'm like, yeah, I know, I wrote a whole book about it. It's a really tough period of time. And other people see that and they say, oh, they're so fragile. They're such snowflakes. And I think a lot of it is just from lack of good information in terms of how difficult it is to live with uncertainty. That I'm a Gen Zer, so my 20s looked a lot like y'all's 20s, minus the social media, which I'm pretty grateful for. But, I think above my generation, people had partners earlier, they had homes, they had jobs, they had kids, for better or for worse. There are upsides and downsides to that. But if you haven't kind of gone through the modern 20s the way you are, you don't really know what it's like to go for 5 or 10 years of just not having life set up. The brain really hates uncertainty, and it actually interprets it as danger. So if you feel like you wake up every day and you're thinking, That's because your brain is interpreting all the uncertainty that you're living with as pretty dangerous and anxiety provoking, and that's a normal reaction to have. Part of your 20s is sort of learning how to cope with that and not catastrophize about it, but it's also getting your life set up so that you wake up in the morning and you feel like, I kind of do know what's going on, and my brain doesn't have to be firing that way. So I guess I would say a lot of whoever the older people are who are saying, snowflakes, whatever, they just don't understand that research, in my opinion. And I think it makes for really good headlines and radio and TV. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been on the radio and TV and people are just trying so hard to get me to say that, helicopter parents and 20s or somethings are so fragile, and that's obviously not my perspective.
So I want to be a therapist post-grad down the
Nice.
line.
It's a great life.
I'm looking forward to it. And I'm thinking about what skills I can pick up in what I'm doing right now that are going to apply to that. And I read that you were an outward bound instructor. And I'm wondering how that or anything else you did before, all the education that goes into doing that, how that plays into your work now.
Yeah, so I think some people, if they know a little bit about my book or my work but haven't read it, they might assume that I'm saying, you got to graduate from college, you got to get that briefcase, and you got to get out there and be in that office building and sit in front of the computer. That's the only way to get your life moving forward. Not the message. The message is, hey, get out there and you do you, whatever it is you think that might be, start doing it, because you'll either be doing it or figure out that's not it and pivot. But my first job out of UVA was as an outward bound instructor. And that was for a variety of reasons, including I was a little burned out and tired after college. I'm sure y'all can't relate to that at all. But so I thought I wanted to sort of get out and have some real world experience and just get out of the classroom before I might go back to grad school. So especially for clinical psych, I think that's often a very good call, because there's it's one of those jobs that you go into where the people you're going to be working with might be 5, 10, 20, 30 years older than you. And so it feels good to have sort of gone out there and, had some experience. I think what was useful to me, and probably would be for everybody, is that I made sure the experience I was getting had something called identity capital, that, being an outward bound instructor might not be the most ambitious thing I could have done after graduating from UVA, but it had a lot of capital, and that people were very interested in that. So when I went back to go to grad school, so I was applying to Berkeley. They let 5 people in per year to my program. There were 4 people from Ivy League schools and me who had just come from 5 years of Outward Bound. But when I went on my interviews, everybody was like, ooh, tell me about Outward Bound and what was that like? They had a lot of respect for the experience and for what I'd been doing. So I guess I would say it's great and okay to get life experience to your liking after college, but think a little bit about what kind of capital it has, what skills it's teaching you, because you may want to sort of re-enter when you're ready to enter sort of the job world or the grad school world. People are going to want to understand what you've been doing. Zeke, stop. Do not.
Okay, so we have another question for you. So kind of along the idea of coping, but what skills can we learn and practice now that will help us with happiness and coping when we are older? And so at this age, everything can tend to feel life-changing, and emotions tend to take over actions and thoughts.
Yeah, so excellent. I mean, that's a huge topic, and there's so many ways you can enter that. I mean, of course, people talk a lot about mindfulness, so I won't, because everybody does. But that's a great one. But I think even just more, that's sort of the emotional piece. Like, how do I kind of bring myself to the present and not time travel and go into the future and freak out about what may happen that hasn't happened yet. I think probably even more useful, just as useful as that, is just to focus on, managing your own thoughts. So one of the most common reasoning errors we make when we're feeling uncertain or anxious is catastrophizing, which I've mentioned a couple times. So that's sort of the black and white thinking of, I'm never going to get into grad school. No one's ever going to love me. My life's never going to work out. So it's always very black and white and very future oriented. And so just to sort of help yourself kind of notice when you're catastrophizing and saying, okay, what are some other ways I could interpret that? Okay, well, I may not get into every grad school I apply to, but maybe I'll get into one that's good enough or great. Or this person may not have been the person for me, but maybe there'll be someone else. Or this job may not be amazing, but maybe it's okay. And so just to kind of notice your reasoning errors, which tend to be catastrophizing in black and white, and say, how can I see that as, maybe it's not what I think, is a good place to start. Okay.
So how, this is about the relationship aspect of the book. And so how do you plan relationships when there's so much logistical uncertainty in your 20s?
Yeah, that's another thing, when I was saying, I think some older generations may not understand how challenging the 20s are, is that, these days it's not unusual for jobs are trying to get worked out, as towns are trying to get worked out, as relationships are trying to get worked out, and often that's a big mess. My poor partner and I think we moved cross country, Berkeley to UVA to Berkeley to UVA, I think 4 times in 5 years, and had a baby in the middle somewhere. But so that's stressful. And so I think, again, I don't know that you can fully plan it out as much as I think you sort of engage with it intentionally, sort of what am I trying to accomplish here, both with work and with love, and which one needs to take the priority, or is there a way they can go together? Does it have to be one or the other, or all or nothing? Is there a way they can go together in a way that I might not have envisioned? So I had somebody email me the other day who said, I read your book, and I decided I was going to move to this town that I knew I really wanted to live, but hadn't had the nerve to do it until I read your book. So I read your book, and I was all set to do it, and then I just went on the best date I've ever been on. What do I do now? So, of course, I don't really have the answer to that question, but she's getting at what you're talking about, and I said I can't really give you the answer to that question, but it's early in getting to know this person, and you haven't moved yet. So why don't you just take it one day at a time with the relationship and with the plans for the move, and see what transpires. And these days it's not unusual for people to live apart, and then someone to come to where you are, and then you go to where they need to go. That's kind of how it goes now, but that's one of the things that makes life more stressful than maybe it used to be.
Awesome, thank you.
Sure.
I'm just going to rapid fire.
Yeah.
And so can you talk a little bit more about the work that you do with your clients?
Yeah, so I'm a clinical psychologist, which means I'm a therapist, as you might imagine. You might have gotten from this conversation, but certainly from my book, I'm a very practical, here and now, let's focus on your 20s and, think about what you want from here forward, then let's go down the humongous rabbit hole of the past. Sometimes the past can be important, but I don't think you want to spend your whole therapy with someone looking backward. So I tend to work with people a lot on what's going on in the here and now that's making you unhappy or stressed or anxious, etc. And or what is it about the future that you want, you're worried you're not going to get, that's making you feel stressed or anxious or unhappy, etc. And so that tends to be my take on it. And again, because I'm an adult development person, I really think of myself as a developmental clinical psychologist. So all the work I do with 20-somethings, I'm seeing in the context of their brain development, their social development, their romantic development. Everything is sort of, with 20-somethings in mind. And not everybody has that perspective, so I think it helps.
Yeah, so this is our final question.
Okay.
We've gotten a couple of questions about coping with uncertainty. So can you just talk about how we should do that as 20-something-year-olds?
Yeah, so, people ask me a lot, what is the one trait, trick, tip, thing I can do to guarantee happiness always and forever? Don't have it, okay? But But these days, I would say one of the most important skills is to be able to tolerate uncertainty. That what people want to do when they feel uncertain is to create certainty. Like, fix it, close it, know it. And because of the pandemic, because you're 20, because it's the 21st century, like, that's just, Zeke, that's a camera, buddy. Okay. Zeke, stop. Zeke, stop. He's not an assassin, that's a camera. All right, stop, buddy. Okay. So anyway, I would say to really get comfortable with letting things be uncertain, and just letting it be, which I know sounds like the worst, least helpful thing. Like, I don't have a magic trick for you, but that's because there's no way to kind of create that certainty that people want. Sometimes the way they do it is to go ahead and rush into something that maybe isn't the thing, or to go ahead and, move in with that person, or quit that job, or leave that town. And sometimes I think we just have to let ourselves be uncertain and keep putting one foot in front of the other and wait for more data to emerge. I had a med student in my office a few weeks ago who was new to med school. She was very stressed. She was like, this isn't for me. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how that's going to turn out. I said, you just need more data points. Like, you need more data points, and we don't have them, so we're going to have to just keep showing up for class and keep showing up for medical school. Let it be uncertain, and then you'll find out.
Well, this time has gone too quickly, but thank you, Dr. Meg Jay, for all these good words.
It's fun. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's such a gift to hear about her work and hear her research. Her books are available. Go online to her website. She's got articles and all over the place. So there's much more good stuff to come. And I want to thank each of you again for coming today, for joining us under the tent. Every Friday, like I said, you're most welcome, no matter who you are or what you're thinking about. We'd love to have you join us and be with us. One of our traditions at the end of Vintage is a blessing. So I send you all in peace, again, no matter who you may be or where you may be or what you may be thinking or holding. We are always here welcoming you into this space again. So may the Lord Christ go with you wherever he may send you. May he guide you through the wilderness, protect you through the storm. May he bring you home rejoicing at the wonders he has shown you. May he bring you home rejoicing once again into our doors. Thanks, y'all. Go in peace.